All right, welcome to another Discussions from the Frontline, where we're talking about the impact of AHPRA overreach and what that's doing to health practitioners, the search for evidence-based best practice and overall public health outcomes. I'm Cara from AMPS, the Australian Medical Professionals Society, and today we have the lovely Dr Andrew McIntyre. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for the invitation.
Dr McIntyre is a consultant gastroenterologist who graduated from Queensland University in 1983 and trained at Princess Alexandra Hospital and Wooden Valley Hospital. He's worked as a gastroenterologist on the Sunshine Coast since 1991 up until December last year when he was mandated out. He's the owner of a busy registered day surgery, which he's now not allowed to enter. He also established Medical Objects, a health IT company serving over 80,000 healthcare professionals in Australia, and has an active interest in regenerative agriculture, which is keeping him busy since December. So welcome, thank you very much. We know how much it costs our health professionals at the moment to speak up. So can you just share with everybody sort of your journey over the last couple of years and why you've decided to step away from medicine and to speak up about what you feel is going on and what's happening to evidence-based science, medicine, and the impact that's having on our communities?
Well, I guess for me, the journey probably goes back, 20 years. I haven't seen a drug rep in 20 years, and I really got quite annoyed with their manipulation. Often it was on a profiling local level that actually annoyed me, and I eventually just said, well, I've had enough of this. I'm just not going to see any drug reps. And I've certainly been aware of, them over promoting new products to try and get them released and used by everyone, when really, traditionally, when we had a new product, we used it cautiously for a few years until we had a feel for it. But they do various things, they often call trials, to try and get a product launched and used very widely before there really is this sort of phase 4 data available. And I mean, the best example of that is Vioxx, where it's estimated that it killed between 30 and 60,000 Americans, and it took 4 years before it was withdrawn. So, it was apparently a great arthritis drug, and technically it should have caused less ulcers, but it caused a huge excess of heart attacks. And the company was fined $1 billion, and I think they paid out $4 billion in settlements, but I think they sold $9 billion worth of drugs, so they possibly still made a profit. So I've sort of been aware of that. And I guess I was trained long enough ago that I was involved in, the release of Captopril, where we just used it on the worst renal patients. I think I was working in the renal unit at that time, and we cautiously used it, but after a few years, we understood it, and its use became much more widespread. So, when the vaccine for COVID was released, I sort of had the assumption that it would only be used on high-risk patients initially, because we knew that you could really stratify someone's risk pretty well certainly by the time the vaccine was released. And I was quite horrified to think that they were going to roll it out to everyone over 18, let alone now they're talking about 0 to 4, which is just completely ridiculous in my mind. But, people under 30, we knew their risk was infinitesimally small, but we didn't really know what the risk of the vaccine was. And I had concerns about it. Probably to backtrack a little bit, I do run a day surgery, and, there's about 30 staff or so. So, the images of the pandemic that appeared first were pretty horrifying, and, hospitals overrun and people dying in the street. And some of that was probably false, but still everyone was concerned. So, I basically thought, well, I'm responsible here. I need to learn about this because nobody knew anything. So I started reading, learning about COVID right from the start, because I figured we're at risk. I need to know. And I probably don't have huge respect for, the government in terms of giving us necessarily the right information, but I wasn't being disrespectful. It was just that I wanted to know myself. So, the last 2 years I've spent, I hate to think how many hours reading and looking at presentations on COVID. So, but fairly early on, things started happening which were like quite crazy. And, Queensland Health banned hydroxychloroquine. Like, before I even had a chance to look at what the evidence for hydroxychloroquine was, it's like out of the blue, it's banned with a threat of 6 months jail. And it's like, subsequently, there's about 300 papers on hydroxychloroquine, and it appears to work if used early and in sensible doses. But we also saw like fraudulent trials on hydroxychloroquine used to condemn it, using 2.4 grams rather than 400 milligrams a day, used late in hospital. And, we wouldn't expect it to work, and we would have expected side effects at those sort of ridiculous doses. So, and then those trials were subsequently withdrawn and were actually fraudulent, but the decisions to condemn hydroxychloroquine were, of course, never reviewed. So I wasn't probably that aware of the evidence for hydroxychloroquine, but I was certainly a bit surprised at 6 months jail for prescribing a drug that's been around for 50 or 60 years and is considered very safe. Take that away before I even had an urge to prescribe it just did seem a bit strange. And probably the next thing that really hit me was the ivermectin story, because, I've used ivermectin to treat parasites for 20 years. And I heard that it may have some activity against COVID, so I probably know far more about ivermectin than I ever did. But there was pretty solid evidence that it had an effect. And then a meta-analysis was released by Tess Laurie, who's a very respectable researcher, showing statistically significant reductions in hospitalization and death of, like, I think, 60% in the vicinity then. And it was moderate level certainty, which is pretty good for a trial. And, a 60% reduction in something is highly significant. Statins are supposed to give a 0.3% reduction in cardiac events. That's the sort of, the thing to compare it to. A 60% reduction in death is like amazing. But then the evidence was appearing, so I assumed that, that it would get some traction. Not that we had much COVID point, so it's all sort of hypothetical. But then I saw a news conference, that was when I was still watching the news, where, the journalist asked, what about ivermectin, to the health minister, and he deferred to Paul Kelly, the CMO, who said there's been multiple clinical studies, not a single one shows any benefit. It's going, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. And he didn't even bother saying, oh, they're small, they're unreliable, we don't trust them. He just went all in and said, there's multiple trials, none of which show any benefit. And it's like, that's misinformation. It's definitely not true. And I guess that was like a big realization for me. And then I started seeing state chief health officers, say things about COVID that were blatantly untrue. And, the vaccine immunity is better than natural immunity and all this sort of stuff. And And then I sort of realized that there were vaccine complications occurring overseas, and the AMA is going safe and effective. And I'm going, you can't say that. That's, we need to be cautious with this. And I actually resigned from the AMA because after being attacked on Twitter by a few AMA people for saying, you can't say that, we don't know how safe it is at this point. And that's the thing. They could have been right or they could have been wrong, but they didn't know. Nobody knew at that point. So, to go out to the public and say this is safe and effective when you don't know is, well, it erodes respect in the medical profession, I would have thought. And I already thought that the rollout was overly aggressive because we had such limited information. So, gradually you realize that what you're being told is provably wrong and a provable lie. So it's like, what's going on here? I don't get it. So I'd also, before it was released, had looked at the literature showing that, a vaccine doesn't always help. It can make things worse. And we've never had a coronavirus vaccine that worked. All the animal trials showed ADE where, they got antibodies, they survived the vaccine. These are probably traditional vaccines. But when they got the disease, like a high percentage of them died. And that's been seen in humans with RSV vaccines. So I was aware that, it wasn't clear that getting an antibody was necessarily good in the long run. So, I just really felt there needed to be an abundance of caution, and that what was happening was quite reckless. And this was before we knew of all the vaccine side effects. So, and that's certainly denied. There's been a lot of analysis, and I think at the moment there's like 26,000 deaths in the US VAERS database, and there's about 800 or something in the TGA, and the average TGA vaccine death reporting is 2.4 a year. So 2.4 versus 800. Plus, there's a lot of analysis that shows that the Bradford Hill criteria for causality have been met. There's a plausible mechanism, there's a temporal relationship, there's a dose response, and there's about 10 criteria, but it meets those criteria. So for the TGA say, oh no, none of them are related. Well, you need to give better evidence than just your word. I want it. And they've, avoided doing any autopsies, which should be done. They've avoided closely monitoring it. I constantly talk to people who've had a vaccine side effect who say, I couldn't get it onto the TGA. It was rejected, or my doctor wouldn't do it. So there's an underreporting factor for the Australian thing, and people have said it's probably at least 9. So, 9 times 800 is more than. Obviously, not every one of those deaths is going to be vaccine related, but if you think that 2.4 deaths per year was the average, 800 seems like a little bit of something going wrong here, and it's ignoring signals of harm. People have probably seen the Peter McCulloch videos where there was a flu vaccine that was released in a hurry in the US, and when it reached 25 deaths, it was pulled off the market. So I think 50 people ended up dying from it, but now got 26,000 deaths in the US system, and there's no move to pull it off the market. So it's I don't understand it, and it certainly leads you down the conspiracy path in the end, because there is no good explanation for why are we ignoring this signal. These databases are designed to give us a warning signal that something's going wrong. And we're ignoring the warning signal, explaining it away. And the TGA have not made any effort to present, like, there'd be a lot of work to investigate 800 deaths, but if they really saying that they're not related, they should be releasing detailed reviews of each case to convince people that they're not related, because it's happening all over the world, all the databases, same conditions, same problems, satisfies the Bradford Hill criteria. So, it's causative until someone can prove to me that it's not. And that's heresy. But I'm sorry, no, that's good science. So and we're rolling it out to children who have, a healthy child has a 1 in a million chance of dying of COVID, supposedly to reduce the missing school. It's ridiculous. I mean, they're missing school from vaccine, like accepted normal vaccine side effects of flu-like symptoms and feeling sick. They're missing school because of that, whereas COVID for most children is a sniffle. And unfortunately, people will die of COVID, but they're not. The numbers are similar to a normal year's mortality. And I mean, you can't stop that. People who are very sick, at risk of dying, there's a straw that breaks the camel's back. And if you get rid of one straw, another straw will appear. So, it might bring forward someone's death by a few months, but it's no greater than a normal year. So, but the Australian sort of all-cause mortality figures appear to have not been released for quite a while, which does make me suspicious, because overseas we've seen, like, I think in 18 to 24 or so, I can't remember the exact age range in the UK, there was like over 80% increase.
I think it was like 18 to 49, or the working age group, something like that.
Yeah. And the insurance companies have reported, 40, 50% increased all-cause mortality since the vaccine rollout, not prior to that. So we're in a sort of unusual position because we didn't really have much COVID while the rest of the world was suffering from it. So, but I mean, we've mostly had Omicron, and it is quite significantly less severe with a lower risk of death. And, I think even Bill Gates described it as a live attenuated vaccine, which is, sort of what it is really. So, but we continue to mandate a vaccine that doesn't stop you getting COVID. And there's pretty good evidence that it actually increases your risk of getting COVID, certainly doesn't stop you transmitting it. And there's some evidence that the viral levels are higher in the vaccinated. I mean, they're at least as high. And there's some evidence that people who are vaccinated are less symptomatic. So they're possibly worse. They're certainly no better. So what's the difference between a vaccinated and an unvaccinated worker of any type? I mean, I'm sure most people know of fully vaccinated households where everyone's got COVID. It's not that the unvaccinated don't get COVID, but it's such a low-risk disease, then you have to take into account the risk of the vaccine in making your decision. And certainly my position at the moment is that the risk of the vaccine is significant and the risk of the disease is quite low, a normal risk that you take in a year. So I'm happy to take my normal risk of dying of something versus an unknown risk with a few alarming safety signals. But this doesn't seem to impress the powers that be, and they're not interested in making any having any debate or logical arguments. And I mean, you touched on the APRA, thou shalt not say anything different from the government.
You're not
that I
allowed
sort of-
to say anything against the public health messaging, essentially.
Yeah,
How it's
yeah.
outlined by the Indemnity Society.
Yeah, and I saw something that said it doesn't matter if what you're saying is backed by evidence or not. You know, they will still deregister you, even if what you're saying has better evidence than what they're saying. It's completely ridiculous. It's like, I'm not going to practice that way. You know, I'm not interested in practicing that way. So, I mean, I'm lucky that I'm sort of probably at an age and a position where I can retire, and I've got other interests. And I guess that's why I'm speaking out, because I mean, I've also got sort of daughters in their early 20s, one of whom's a radiographer who's mandated out. And, you know, people of that age want to go out and do stuff. So, you know, the pressure to get vaccinated so you can go and do stuff with your vaccinated friends is quite high. So and the reality is they've had COVID, and it's like, well, I've had worse. Colds was the comment. So their immunity is now better than a vaccinated person, but their vaccine exemption lasts for 4 months, which vaccine exemption should be permanent. You know, it's if you have natural immunity, you generally have multiple antibodies to multiple components of the virus, and you're more likely to deal with a variant well than someone who's vaccinated with one antibody to the alpha version, which has been extinct for over a year. So and I mean, we know that it doesn't stop you getting COVID and might actually increase your risk. So there's so much illogical policy making. And I mean, they obviously know that it's illogical because they're saying you can't debate it. Because if you could debate it, it's easy to shoot down. And in the end, I've been in networks and Zoom calls with a lot of very experienced doctors, just, you know, and that's helped me, because like some of them are experienced immunologists and things like that. So you're actually getting the views of lots of experts, and everyone's just, you know, beside themselves. And I mean, we've written various things like articles which immediately get rejected. It's like, we follow the science here, and this isn't following the science. And it's like, yes, it is. And it's, you know, it's like the ivermectin story. It's the statistical evidence is better than many. Well, it's better than the vaccine. It's better than molnupiravir or Paxlovid. Huge numbers of studies, huge numbers of patients, and such a good safety record for ivermectin. I mean, if it doesn't do any good, the chances of doing harm are minuscule. So probably less than Panadol. So to actually deny people something with statistical evidence of benefit, virtually no risk of harm, it's unconscionable. It's, you know, that I will not support that. That is wrong. Even if it doesn't work, if someone wants to try it, they should have the right. And to sort of go on about, oh, well, people with scabies won't be able to get it. I mean, they make it by the kilo in India and places. I mean, if we needed it, we could get supplies here overnight. Really? Fly in a ton of ivermectin, please. And, you know, well, let's look at your testing to prove that it's pure or something, but there's no trouble getting it. And the countries that have used it, there's lots of observational evidence that their curves flatten much quicker than the equivalent state that didn't use it. Prophylaxis, there's good evidence for that. So, you know, there's a recent Together trial that says, oh, it doesn't work at all. But I mean, it's often done by people with biased vested interest, and the design of the trials is far from adequate, and even the numbers in their reporting don't seem to add up. So, I mean, I've also been aware, we've been on the calls with Tess Laurie, I've been aware of the Andrew Hill saga for quite a few months before it became public, about how his meta-analysis showed statistically significant benefit at a similar level to Tess Laurie's, and he was, you know, rah about ivermectin, and at the last minute, the conclusion read, not enough evidence to use it outside of a clinical trial. And, you know, when you consider the amount of evidence that was there compared with like the newer on patent oral treatments who had 800 patients or something in the trial, it's quite ridiculous to say, well, we'll approve this, but we won't approve ivermectin. So, yeah, it's...
And even the vaccine or the gene-based injections, the evidence for those. So they're saying we can't use ivermectin because there's not enough evidence, but at the same time, they're rolling these out and mandating them
where there's evidence of harm
to your livelihood when the evidence isn't. Didn't the CEO of Pfizer say that the first two don't really do anything against Omicron?
No, they're not effective against Omicron
and
at
so
all.
Now we're rolling that out.
Yeah, I mean, it's acknowledged by the drug company that it's not effective against Omicron, and I mean the booster might help for a month, but then what are you going to do? Keep boosting people for the rest of their life? Well, I'm sure they'd like that from a sales point of view, but it doesn't make any sense. And there's certainly evidence that, you know, it may suppress people's immunity, and that the spike protein that is generated may last in the system for like 15 months. So if you keep having boosters, the levels build up. And the spike protein certainly has evidence of toxicity. So none of it makes any sense, but we're not allowed to debate it. And the media is bought off, and they will only give out one message. So it's very hard to get the story out, and many people are completely brainwashed by it, and are quite aggro at any suggestion that it doesn't work, even though the science shows that it doesn't work. So, and in Australia, one of the highest vaccination rates in the world seemed to occur just before we got a major outbreak of COVID. And if you look around the world, that is very common. And people are a bit ahead of us, Israel and things like that. Vaccination goes up, COVID appears. So, you know, the effect on people's immunity, which, you know, there's certainly evidence for, possibly is related to bringing on outbreaks. So there's certainly a correlation between vaccination and COVID outbreaks around the world. So, but, you know, you're not allowed to say that, but the science is there. It's just a correlation. We can't say that the vaccination causes COVID outbreaks, but it, you know, it appears that way. It certainly doesn't stop them, or, you know, so, and for most places in the world, the deaths in the year when people were vaccinated are often higher, and the COVID rates, than they were in the year when there were no vaccines. So it's very hard to show a clear benefit, particularly when certainly evidence that your chances of developing COVID increase for 2 weeks after the first injection, but they exclude that period from the figures. You're unvaccinated if you get COVID in that time. So the reporting is biased, and when the reporting starts to show bad things, like in the UK, they say they're no longer going to report vaccinated versus unvaccinated. So there's no transparency in the data. Sometimes it seeps out by accident, but when people, it's encouraging anti-vaxxers. Well, it is because, well, you're an anti-vaxxer now if you don't support mandates. So I guess I'm an anti-vaxxer. So, because I certainly don't support mandates. And I've probably had the usual vaccines. I've not been a big fan of the flu vaccine because of low efficacy, but that's always been my decision. So it should be your decision. And that's we shouldn't be needing to have this conversation.
No.
Because we have a basic right to decide whether we accept a treatment or not. And taking that right away is so totalitarian. It's quite crazy. And I mean, those freedoms were won, in World War II, basically. So to take them away is shocking, really. So, people can't get informed consent because their doctor's not allowed to say anything other than the mainstream message. So the media won't say anything other than the mainstream message. So there's a large percentage of the population who's completely brainwashed. And I guess that's people have referred to mass formation, and that people can't get informed consent via the decree of APRA. Basically, APRA are enforcing the government's line on patients, and I don't really think the medical profession should accept that. But bodies like
guiding principle is to protect the public. But how do you protect the public if all you're doing is enforcing a government edict, essentially? This is the public health messaging, you will follow it. Regardless, and
they have no
of evidence.
expertise.
Pardon?
Yeah, they have no expertise to I think the board consists of lawyers, accountants, a physio. The only medical person is one psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So they have no expertise, and even the AMA. I mean, they should have a scientific committee examining the evidence. But I get the impression, I don't know, but I get the impression that they're just following what they've been given. So, I guess we do need a little bit more disrespect for authority and more, I'm going to look at it myself thinking, which certainly was the old-fashioned medical thing. I mean, as a registrar, consultants would argue or debate the various merits of treatment all the time, and it wasn't considered rude or anything. It's like, well, have you seen this article? Or I don't think that works, or I'd like to try this. That the idea that a guideline is always right is silly. I mean, often the people that create the guidelines are heavily conflicted. Once you put something in writing, it doesn't change. Whereas, if the evidence changes, you should change your practice. I mean, there's terrible evidence that says it takes 10 years for new innovations to actually get from evidence to the bedside. But I think we're in danger of, conflicted evidence being put in place quickly and never changed, and then it just becomes like folklore or something that's what we've always done. And there's a number of medical procedures that were considered dangerous, and someone went back and looked and the evidence was minuscule, and we realized, well, they're not dangerous, we can do them. So once things become standard practice, they often don't go away, and that's the concern. So this, even just normal guideline practice has dangers, but a guideline from the government that can't be challenged is
By
just
the
alarming.
experts
Yeah,
or by
it's
anyone on the
alarming.
front ground. Well, even
Yeah.
their guiding the document, their guiding document, the Australian Health Sector Emergency Response Plan for Novel Coronavirus says there needs to be openness and transparency, and that there's supposed to be ongoing communication with those on the front line.
Yeah.
But instead of there being, well, it appears from what I'm hearing from people we're discussing, from our members, from various different politicians and things like that, the data that people are seeking, they cannot get access to.
No.
So far,
hidden.
all of the most we've got on people trying to find out, well, what evidence are you using to implement mandates and various different things, was meeting minutes I think Senator Antic got from the South Australian government. And then instead of engaging with the front line, like experts and consultants like yourself that have done research, that know about the different medications and the evidence, and they're researching and speaking to experts from various different countries and trying to get that transparency and engaging with those on the front line, you're being silenced by a government regulator, of whom says you follow the public health messaging. It doesn't matter what evidence, we will suspend you.
Yeah, no, it's dangerous, which, you know, I think in the long run will be shown just how dangerous it's been. And
telling parents that it's safe to give their kids this novel technology, of which the Pfizer CEO says doesn't work against current variant anyway.
And I mean, the FDA, one of the members of that was also the editor for the New England Journal of Medicine, who said, oh, we won't really know how good this is until we roll it out for the children. And it's like, well, we certainly know that the risk of coronavirus is minuscule. I mean, it's never zero, but it's minuscule. So why would you roll something out where you don't really know the risk and there's a safety signal already in adults? And I mean, certainly in the US, we've got documented deaths of children from myocarditis. I mean, the number of documented cases is small, but I mean, you try and get stuff like that published, it's not easy. And, you know, I know of 2 fully published autopsy deaths of myocarditis in young children. And I mean, that's 2 deaths too many. It's like, stop. So there is this, they are ignoring the safety signal. And, you know, you can't say the safety signal isn't there based on the TGA saying, oh, none of them are related. It's like, well, show me the evidence that they're not related, because all the normal criteria says they are. Yeah. So not all of them, but show us
validity data.
Yeah, show us your investigation. Have you really investigated 800 people in depth? I mean, that's a big job. So that needs to be done.
Tissue cultures, blood samples, autopsies, all of those sort of things, and then tell the people the truth. And then you've got like the COVID Medical Network submitted that big letter to the TGA with all the FOIs requests that were redacted. Have you done the genotoxicity studies? Have you done the reproductive toxicity studies? All of those things.
Oh, no, nothing's been done.
Do you, as a medical profession, have answers to those questions so that you can give your patients informed consent?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, it's unsafe and ineffective, which might be embarrassing. But when lives are at stake, you need to get over your embarrassment and say, at least stop mandates. You know, if people want to take it, then, you know, they need proper advice and they need proper figures. But I'm not opposed to someone taking it. I don't think it's logical, but, you know, to mandate something that doesn't work and risks causing their death is, it's completely crazy. So, and I will not be a part of that. So, so that's, that may end my career, but I'm really not interested in working under these circumstances. And if they've done it now, what else are they going to do? They've already announced they're going to build a Moderna factory to produce 2 million vaccines a year. I mean, for what? We already bought over 200 million Pfizer vaccines, and for a supposed 2-dose regime on 25 million people, I think their maths is pretty poor, or they knew something that they're not admitting to. Because if you bought 50 million vaccines, you'd say, well, we've covered everyone. But no, you buy 220 million. So it suggests that there's a lot of lies. There's more to this than meets the eye. I don't know what that is, but it doesn't make logical sense. So I'm sorry, but I will not comply, with crazy things that are, risking people's lives. And it's not just lives, the disability of people are suffering is quite horrendous. So I'm out. And you won't shut me up, I'm sorry. So, if they want to shut me up, TGA needs to release something that convinces me that their statement on the vaccine safety is correct. And we need to publish proper figures showing that the vaccine is effective, because all the figures so far suggest that it is ineffective and may actually have negative efficiency. And this is before we get to any potential long-term effects, which have not been studied. So this is craziness.
Yep.
So
and remove the gags.
And remove the gag.
The banning of safe, well, as you've said, safe and effective treatments.
Yeah. Well, exactly right. I mean, it's, if a drug's available, and I think there's evidence that it works and it's safe, then it's a matter of me talking to a patient saying, well, I think you should try the ivermectin with some, tetracycline and zinc, because I think there's enough evidence to try it and the safety profile is this. It's my decision. It's not the TGA's decision to say, oh, we approve this drug, but now we're stopping you using it. It's not their role to do that. I mean, I don't think the head of the TGA is even a doctor. I mean, it's like, show me something solid as to why I shouldn't do it, not it'll cause vaccine hesitancy. I mean, you better cause vaccine hesitancy because it works. So that's the problem.
What causes vaccine hesitancy, especially to parents, is you mandating an experimental drug, then gagging doctors and banning treatments that people say, and they're not giving anyone data and silencing any discussion. That'll cause vaccine hesitancy.
Well, it's certainly causing me government hesitancy, that's for sure, because it's totalitarian what they're doing, and they need
undermining trust.
Huge undermining of trust, and it will undermine the trust in the medical profession, because the truth will come out in some shape or form, and people will go back and say, you told me it was safe and effective. The AMA were sprouting that everywhere. I mean, people will be guided by that. And when it comes out that, they didn't know. They were saying that without knowing. So that in its own right is wrong. They should say it appears to be effective and it appears to be safe, but we need to
and we'll keep you updated on the data.
We'll keep you updated, yeah. And I mean, the thing is, the Pfizer evidence shows that it wasn't safe and effective in the original trial. I mean, more people died in the vaccine group at 6 months than the control group. And there happens to be excessive cardiac arrests in the vaccine group, which you could look at initially and go, oh, it's just bad luck. But, ambulance services have been very overloaded, and there's quite a few people dropping dead from cardiac arrests all over the place, much more than normal. So I think that was probably a true signal. But they vaccinated the control group after 6 months, so we'll never know about the long term of this. But I don't think it's going to be pretty somehow. So anyway, that gives you an overview of my thoughts. There's a lot of other thoughts, but that covers that angle. And you know, I'm flabbergasted at what's going on.
Yeah.
And I will not comply. You know, that's the bottom line.
You're a dad and a doctor, and you're going to fight back.
That's right.
And tell the truth. So thank you for your bravery, and thank you for sharing your story. And thank you for refusing to comply and being prepared to risk it to speak up. So
okay. Well, thank you for the invite. Okay.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.